day to you. Welcome back to the Higher Grounds podcast. Appreciate you coming by and being a part of our program today. 30 minutes or roughly thereabout we'll spend with you if you'll stay with us. I know some of you will look at Mike and you'll turn it off here in just a half second. So don't look at Mike. Don't look at me. Look at Matt. He's the face of the program today, and we're really concentrating on Brother Matt today and all of the expertise that he brings to the table. And we are thrilled and honored that Brother Matt would be with us. How are you doing, Matthew?
I'm doing pretty good.
Pretty and good. You heard it.
Good.
If it's a lie, he told it. He said he's pretty and good. Go ahead.
Pretty and good.
What you been into?
Nothing.
There you go.
Right out of the horse's mouth.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing.
Nothing. I don't do nothing.
Camera right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
You just don't do anything.
Whatever my wife tells me to do.
And he's honest.
And
today.
he's honest about it.
Honest, yeah.
And of course, being as that, my wife and I know your wife. She is, she is really what keeps you grounded.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And she really, I mean, I know that your name's on the sign up there at that church. I know it is.
You know who pastors it?
I know who pastors that church. I know where you get your messages. I've heard you preach.
You heard me preach?
Yeah, and my wife spoke to your wife, and my wife said, "Listen to this thought Miss Stephanie just gave me."
Yeah.
And I'm telling you,
If you go on our Facebook page, you'll see I preached that.
yeah. And I'm gonna tell you, Gordon Heights Baptist Church is blessed to the Lord to have your wife.
They are.
Yeah, I don't disagree
I'm
with
blessed to
that.
have her too.
I ain't no doubt about that, friend. Ain't nobody else would have you.
That's right.
That's right. But we're glad she's got you.
Me too.
That takes you off the market. Whew. Go ahead, Brother Michael. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Yeah, and what are you doing?
A lot. I'm busy. Yeah, working like a dog.
You're busy.
They
You're
like
busy
it, dog.
enough for you and him.
Yeah,
aren't
busy
you?
enough for me and
No. Well, I mean, somebody's got to be busy enough for the two of you.
That's right,
It's
that's right.
gonna be.
If he ain't doing nothing on that side of the table, I better be doing a lot.
You
on this
better be
side.
doing a lot,
You
filling
better
in the
believe
gap,
it.
making up
Yes,
the hedge.
That's
ain't
right.
you?
Yes, sir.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
How's things in the Lighthouse Baptist Church in Seagrove?
Doing
North Carolina?
good. Doing good. 2022, we're off and running, and we just come out of missions conference, and so we're excited about it.
Yeah, we thought that Brother Steve was going to be on the table with us today.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Nah,
Yeah.
nah, I ain't
I
coming."
think he had a good reason, though. I think he was feeling under the weather.
Yeah, I think he had COVID or something, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to blame it on that. Everything else gets blamed on COVID. So
I believe he's
I
not
think
feeling well.
I think he's got the what is it again?
Covert 22.
Hopefully he's better by now.
It's missed 19. We're up to 22 now.
No, it was 19. We never got 20 or 21. Just 19 and then 20.
We just never named it. We had it.
702 days in.
So, is that what we
I
are?
think it's close to it. I thought it was like 14 days we're going to flatten the curve, and now here we are 702 days later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the hope of
Yeah,
it.
we were having a. We were having.
Figure eight.
You go back in our archives, and we got that episode on, and Matthew is he's well. I do have some statistics on this covert 19, and so he told us all about it. And I said, covert.
Yeah, that's where it all started.
That's where it all
One
started.
mispronunciation,
And
it's gone.
And it's brought more visitors to the table because they never know what kind of dumb stuff we're gonna say on there.
You talking about me or you talking about us?
No, us. No, we're not talking about you, Matthew.
Right.
No, sir.
Well,
We
it was
want to.
funny. We talked about some of the episodes that we've had on here and how good the last couple were.
Mm-hmm.
And then they threw me in one of them, and Brother Andy told me today, "What supper? We're going to hold that one back." I said,
Things are going good, Matthew. Things are going
For a
good.
rainy
well,
day.
we're going to air this one then.
We're gonna wait till this thing plateaus out and starts back down and throw you up on there.
There you go.
So, yeah, that way we get down fast to get back up fast. See?
You got to keep them moving.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you went to the doctor and they put you on that machine and you was constantly going up with your heart rate, you'd die. You'd die. Or down, but
Yeah.
you want it doing this
Yeah.
all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're doing as a podcast. We're trying to keep it moving,
Keep them moving.
and you're helping us.
Regulated.
Yeah, that's right. You're like a good glass of Metamucil. You keep us regulated.
Everything keeps on moving.
That's right. Amen. So thank you for joining us. Today we're going to cover a little unique topic. I have been pastoring for over 30 years. That's hard for me to imagine. I've been the pastor of this church, Galilee Baptist Church, for 20 years. in my 21st year here, and I'm very thankful. I pastor a grand church, a great church. God's blessed me to be able to pastor not perfect people, but precious people, and I have enjoyed my ride here. It's not been without difficulty or problems or even frustrations, but I've enjoyed pastoring this place. I've been in it for over 30 years, pastored the Calvary Baptist Church in Columbia, Tennessee for a handful of years, worked with my dad in the pastorate for a handful of years, and then came here. Brother Mike, how long have you been in the pastorate?
17 years now. I've 16 completed, but I'm going into my 17th year.
Going into the 17th year. And Matthew is the junior man at the table. How long have you been in the pastorate?
6 years.
6 years.
Working on my 7th.
And you've been in the ministry how long?
16.
16. Mm-hmm. So you were assistant to your pastor at Lighthouse for how many years?
About 7 or 8.
7 or 8 years, and then now you've been 7 or 8 years where you're at.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so we've got a fairly young in the ministry, a middle amount of time in the ministry, and a long time in the ministry. And one of the things we want to talk about today, coming from 3 different perspectives, but yet helping, I think, everyone out there. We have a lot of people that watch our podcast who are lay folk. I mean, they are in their church and they're serving Sunday school teachers, deacons, trustees, whatever the case may be, just church members that come and are faithful in their church. And we thank God for all of those people. Every church has to have all of those people. And so we know that sometimes churches, they love their pastor, but they really don't know how to take care of their pastor. And for him to say, this is what the Bible teaches about how to take care of your pastor would seem to be to that man self-serving. I personally have always approached that when I've dealt with our church about that is, I want you to know I'm not always going to be your pastor. There's going to come a time when I'm not here. I'm not going to be the pastor here because of, and I intend on staying until whenever, till the Lord's done with me. But the church, when I'm gone, still is going to have a responsibility, because it will exist, to take care of the next man that's coming in there. And so sometimes that's kind of difficult to figure out. And many years ago, the ministry was viewed as something where that man has decided to dedicate his life to relying on the Lord to feed him with fried rabbit tracks and clothesline gravy, and that he has the ability to get by on nothing at all. And that's just living by faith. And a lot of men, their faith really was not living by faith, but rather living by foolishness. And so that's what we want to deal with today. And Brother Michael approached me, and I've talked to Brother Matt some. Give us some perspective, Brother Mike, on some things that you have seen out there. I know that you talk to a lot of young men in the ministry. What are some things that you've seen, and maybe even a horror story or two? I don't know, but what are some things that you've seen?
I think basically, and so that the audience really understands our heart, our idea of this podcast is to touch on what would be considered in some, according to how it was presented, a taboo topic. And give some lay folks maybe just a perspective, a way to enter into it. But as far as horror stories go, I would say this. It is not uncommon, and I think where this episode will help the most will be the rural country church, maybe in a setting where you don't have many men who are business oriented, especially maybe that don't run companies or hire or understand what that looks like to have a reasonable wage to live on. I think those will be the ones we can help the most with this.
Right.
But some of the horror stories I would say would just be related to this right here. It's not uncommon for rural churches when it comes to financially taking care of their pastor to possibly be a little behind the times. Maybe stuck back a decade, ago
or more,
in that regard. Sometimes even it's not uncommon for a church to say, want the pastor to live by faith, but then the church not necessarily take a step of faith in that area of getting out of maybe even their comfort zone according to what the circumstances are. So I think it's not uncommon for a young man to take a church and maybe be expected to live on $300 a week or something like that. It's probably too common, especially in rural Southern churches these days. And those are the kinds of horror stories, without going into individual stories, that I would say probably share some uniformity.
I preach a lot of meetings out on the road and travel all over the United States, really preaching, but primarily here in the Southeast. And I preach in some churches every single year. They do a very good job of taking care of me while I'm there as a visiting preacher that comes in, and they love me, and I love them. But those churches have pastors who literally work 60 and 80 hours a week on their secular job, and they do all that they can to minister to that local church by visiting and studying and praying and preaching. And if that pastor, because he has a good job and because he is a giver and has the spirit of giving in him, if he were to leave that church, those churches wouldn't even be able to pay their own bills, and they have taken for granted the fact that they have a responsibility to try to take care of and minister to their pastor. And so that's really what we're trying to address here today. I think that kind of sums it up in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think too. I mean, I know this whenever, shortly after my conversion, before I ever actually knew I would be in the ministry, you get saved, you get around church life, and you start hearing conversations. And to me, early on after getting saved, it's almost like you would hear people talk about the paying of the pastor with kind of like a snarl, kind of like, and what they really were doing they were addressing what they felt like his worth was to them. And so in the beginning, I thought, well, the way I would hear it talked about, we don't work 2 or 3 hours a week, so I mean, give him a tip or whatever the case may be. But then I got to study my Bible, and I was like, well, hang on a second, that ideology doesn't line up with what the scriptures are saying. And then I remember starting to teach Sunday school, and just a Sunday school class. And I'm like, well, hang on a second, I'm spending hours and hours in the Bible trying to get a Sunday school lesson together. And this is laborious. I mean, this is taking time and energy and effort and so forth and so on. And as I started growing in my faith, this is kind of where I landed. Before I was ever in ministry, I was like, okay, if this individual is going to be playing this large of a role in my spiritual growth and making this kind of impact in my spiritual life, well then, I mean, honestly, that's huge. And it's a laborious task. And so, I looked at it like this after being saved for a little while and learning a little bit of the Bible. I started looking at it like this. If companies that want to do well are trying to hire and pay the people that are, driven, that are make impacts and things like that. If they're doing that for them, then why is the church trying to get by on just breadcrumbs for the one that is going to make such a huge impact on their spiritual life?
Give me an idea, Brother Matt, of what, and you pastor a small church,
yes,
small rural type church. So what kind of hours do you put in? What does your day look like on an average day?
Well, usually on Mondays it's a little slower, and Mondays and Thursdays are a little slower. But normally, I was thinking in my head when Brother Michael was talking about the hours that we spend in studying, and I'm anywhere between 10 and 12 hours per outline. And so if I'm preaching 3 services a week, I'm automatically almost at 40 hours a week just on studying. And that affects our life on vacation. If me and my wife decide we want to get out of town Monday and Tuesday, we want to take a little 2-day trip, then that means on Tuesday, the majority of my time is going to be thinking about, well, I know we're going through the book of Ezra on Wednesday night. Wednesday night's coming up. And I'm not really getting to enjoy the vacation time because that's on my mind. Matter of fact, even when Christmas time rolled around last year, Christmas fell where the day after Christmas was Sunday, and trying to spend time with your family Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And a lot of folks don't understand. Pastors has families too; they got lives too.
Right.
And so I had somebody come in, fill in, and preach for me Sunday. That way, when I'm at my family dinner on Saturday, my mind wouldn't be focused on trying to spend hours and hours and hours getting ready for Sunday, and it's a mental battle. You battle it mentally, physically. There's a lot of times we have to stay up later or get up earlier, especially if you got to play the role as some pastors teach Sunday school. I've been blessed to not have to do that. I fill in from time to time and things of that nature. But you're looking at just at studying 30 to 40 hours a week, just at studying, not alone the phone calls and things that you got. We try to set aside times that we can make phone calls. We got missionaries we support, we try to stay in contact with. We got folks in the church that are sick, elderly folks that can't get out. People have doctor visits, things of that nature, funerals, and so we juggle a lot. And so there's days probably where you would less and more, up and down 40 to 50, 60 hours a week just on. All right,
so between 50 and 60 hours a week would be average.
It'd be average.
How many days a week do you feel like you're at least putting some work in?
Every day.
So 7 days a week, you're putting some work in.
Yes, sir. Every day.
What does your schedule look like, Brother Mike?
Same. It's the same. Yeah, it's just the same everywhere. I'm putting about the same amount of hours in outlines, and then if you're doing any kind of pastoral counseling or extra kind of ministry work, visits and this, that, and the other. So I'd say my work week's pretty much identical to his as far as time.
And mine is too. And it's literally for me. And it maybe I'll take some criticism on this, but for me, it's 7 days a week.
Yes, sir.
And,
that's your fault.
And it is. I don't disagree with that, but my day starts generally every day between 3:30 and 4:30 generally is when my day begins, and it ends when I collapse into bed at the end of the day. And I think that's for a lot of men, that's the way it goes. I'll give you, for instance, today my day began in the 4 o'clock hour, 4:30, and then I was in a counseling session by 6 a.m. after having done some private time and other work that had to be done between the 4:30 hour and meeting at 6. Was in the podcast room by 8. I will, after we finish recording today, we'll grab a bite of lunch. I'll be back in the studio to record a Bible college class this afternoon. I'll be grading papers this afternoon. By 6 o'clock, I'll be on patrol with the Sheriff's Department. And this day that started at 4:30 will end anywhere from 2:30 in the morning to 4:30 in the morning, meaning I put in a 24-hour day, close to a 24-hour day before the end of the day. And that's not uncommon for men who are serious about the ministry. Now, I don't disagree. There are jacklegs out there who don't care and who spend their time on the golf course and running up and down the road to flea markets and whatever, hunting, fishing, golf, whatever it is that they do. But the bottom line is very simply this. If you have a serious pastor who loves his Lord and he is serious about the ministry, he's working harder than any individual in your church. That is a guaranteed fact. So how do we take care of that man, Brother Mike? Give us some scriptural principles on how to take care of that man, and then we'll talk about practical principles.
Before we get to the scriptural principles, I do want to make a few statements here. In this process of, say, arriving at the right place for a church to be in compensation for a pastor, it's very easy during that process for the office and the heart of that pastor to be exploited. And let me tell you what I mean by that right there.
I think you need to speak to that.
Yeah. If he's not a hireling, then he is going to minister where the money is right or not. Yes. He's going to, because the call of God is on his life and it's in his heart. And sometimes I'm afraid there may be some churches that are aware of that. And so they use that to their advantage. And they know he's not going to bring it up. He'll just keep doing what God's called him to do. And so sometimes there can be some abuse that takes place there, taking advantage of a man's good nature.
No doubt.
And because of that, a lot of times pastors suffer and are compensated well below probably what the Bible, which is what we'll talk about in a minute, actually prescribes for them. A good man, or the right kind of man, knows that money can't make his decision. It's not like a job. You can't say, "Oh, this church is going to offer $20 more thousand." No, if you're called to a flock, you'll stay there where God moves you, regardless if the other part is right. Now, let me expose something that is common, I think, in smaller churches. When it comes to the men or however the decision's made, it's not uncommon for this phraseology to come up. Well, does he have everything he needs?
Yeah, and then you ask him if he has everything.
Yeah, and then they'll come ask you, do you have everything that you need? Let me interpret what that means to us as men. To us, that means this is, can we get by with continuing to pay you what we're paying you, or can we even get you cheaper? You know what I'm saying?
That's exactly right.
There is no other job on the face of this earth where in the interview process, the employer or the boss man looks across the table and says, have you got everything you need? Because we don't work we do work to get our essentials and necessities, but if we're doing a good job, then why is that the line where it's drawn in the sand? Pay a man what he's worth, pay him for his value. Now, with that being said, we'll transition over to what the Scriptures say, okay? And basically, here's what the Scripture, and let me say this before I start talking about just a few verses. Every scriptural admonition in the Bible is against underpaying a pastor, not overpaying.
Right.
We are exhorted not to be greedy of filthy lucre. We're not supposed to chase the money. We're exhorted not to we are exhorted to be aware of how that riches or the desire for them can ensnare us.
Yes, sir.
But when it comes to the side of the table where they're supposed to be distributing to the office, it's toward them more about underpaying. And I'll give you a few examples. Okay, number one, first of all, in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, you and I are aware that the Corinthian church was basically, they had to be giving Paul a problem, bringing or raising issue about paying a preacher.
Yes,
right.
And so in chapter 9, verse 9, the Apostle Paul made this statement in 1 Corinthians. He says, for it is written in the law of Moses, which, I mean, he's kind of getting a little legalistic here. He's reaching back to the law, okay? Boom, boom, all right? Anyway, he says, thou shalt not muzzle the ox, or the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Doth God take care for oxen? Now, let me just stop for a moment. Here's what that verse is meaning, or here's what Paul's pulling from the Old Testament illustratively, okay? In other words, if you use an ox to plow a field, plant seed, bring in a harvest, don't muzzle the ox's mouth from him sticking his head in the what they call the corn crib, and getting something to eat. In the church culture, here's what it means. That ministry of that man is being used to plow the field, sow the seed, and bring in a harvest.
Right.
So how you feed him or compensate him is through making sure that materially he has what he needs, not just to live, but what's fair, what's just in that arena. And that's what Paul is doing there. And he's having to say, now he didn't take any money from Corinth for the simple reason they couldn't handle it.
Yes.
He said, lest the gospel be charged, I'm not even going to take a salary. But he did set up the men that would follow him in the future and let them know the scriptural principle is that you take care of the man that brings success and growth and vitality spiritually to your local assembly.
Right.
He would go on to repeat that same thing in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 18. He says this to the young pastor in training, for the scripture saith, thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and here is where we get into the laborer side.
Yes.
The laborer is worthy of his reward. Now, Brother Matt just talked about his work week. You talked about your work week. I concur with Brother Matt and I'll say this, until the church starts seeing what the man does as a laborer, they'll never be able to arrive at the right side of where they need to be in processing and executing, properly taking care of him financially. Now, here's what's interesting, though. Before he said that to Timothy about muzzling the ox, in verse 17, he made this statement. He said, let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially they who labor in the word and in doctrine. I want to make this statement, and I think this is fair, and I think this needs to be heard and said. Every preacher is not a double honor preacher.
Agreed.
There is a threefold criteria that needs to be met here for a man to be worthy of double honor, which means pay more excessive than just do you have your needs? Okay.
Right. Yes.
They are, number one, does he rule well? That is speaking to his ability to be an administrator, oversee the church, make sure it's got the tentacles of program to reach the community, and then make sure that it runs in an orderly fashion or manner.
Yes, sir.
The second area is him laboring in the word. In other words, is there any depth to his preaching? For the young man out there, when you take your first church, you're probably not a double honor man at that time.
That's exactly right.
You're probably a single honor man. You deserve some honor, but if you're not bringing depth to the pulpit yet because of not enough opportunity and time to study, well, then that's what that's talking about. The third level is not only that he labors in the word, but he labors in doctrine. In other words, does he doctrinally solidify that church? Is he able to preach and teach the word of God doctrinally in a manner to grow the people individually and get them settled and solid to where they're not swayed about with every wind of doctrine? Yes. That man that does that is a double honor man.
And the word honor, if you will do an etymological study of that word, deals with pay. It deals with twice the pay. And so, again, I think what Brother Michael is saying, and I completely concur, is that just because you're a preacher and just because you're pastoring does not necessarily mean that you are of you are of double honor status.
No, sir. Do not believe that at all.
Right.
So here's where we're at now. Okay, so how does a church, how does a group of men or the body itself figure out how do we get our pastor to where he should be financially? Well, I'm going to just throw some statistics and maybe some criteria at you that might help the layman in the pursuit of this cause, okay? First of all, understand this. You better find a system that gets outside of the opinion in the room. Because if you got a room of 10 Baptist laymen sitting together, you're going to have some that think the pastor ought to get everything, and you'll have somebody over here don't think the pastor ought to get anything, okay? So the way you arrive at the right place is going to have to get out of the men in that room, especially if they don't really have any business acumen or don't understand, paying employees. It's got to get out of that, okay? If you research, here's what you'll find. Companies, when it comes to what they pay out to their employee base, they usually spend between 40 to 80% of the revenue in secular companies, paid out to CEOs, workers, everybody across the board. However, when it comes to churches, that percentage, and I think this percentage is still fine, usually falls between 40 to 50% of the revenue or the income that comes in the church is reallocated back out to staff. Let's just say a church brings in $1 million in total revenue for the year. They would spend anywhere from $400,000 to $500,000 on staff. Now, that's not given to one man.
No.
A church of that magnitude has got a staff of 5, 6, 7 people, probably in different kind of administrative functions. But here's the thing where churches, sometimes even rural churches, miss it. Why would you not have a percentage like that was paid out to staff? And here's why. That seed that comes in by way of financial resource is meant to do the work of God.
Right.
So why bring all the seed in, pile it up in the barn real high when you can put it back out in the workmen, laborers, staff that can extend the ministries of your church? So I think just being a good steward, that 40 to 50 percentile, somewhere in that range is a good place for a church to land. Now, let me say this. You're not taking a high year to come up with that number. Why don't you take 4 or 5 years and get an average?
Right.
And then say, okay, how much of this monies do we pay out to staff? Because I know this, if some rural churches were to look at it through that lens, they would find, oh, wow, we're way below the amount of percentage we probably should be paying out.
Right.
And you may not put all that back on your senior pastor, but you may say this, Pastor, we want to get more in line where we should be. And so we want to, make sure you're here. And then that leaves this much left over that if you would like to hire staff or you'd like to bring somebody else on to help get the work of the ministry done, then it's there and it should be put back into people that can help get us there. Okay, so that's that 40 to 50 percentile area of your total revenue it should be a good considering factor for a church to see where they're at, where they're landing. I'll say this should be some other areas of consideration. I think you got to consider a man's education.
Yeah.
If a man's, if he's earned his bachelor's, and then if he's moved on to his master, got his doctorate, whatever the case may be, those are areas, because in the secular world, the more educated a person is, the more they bring to the table, those are usually considered. I'll tell you something else that a church has got to look at. What about his tenure?
Right.
How long has he been there?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
We know this by just church statistics. The longer a man stays, the better the church does. Okay? Then there are things like this right here. Is our church experiencing direct success that connects back to his ministry, meaning his administration and his pulpit prowess? In other words, if he's not there and we plug in some Joe Henry, what's it going to do to the church? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's why I like the percentage being a part of the way a church decides how much they're going to set aside and allocate it to the pastor and the staff. Just simply because of this is that, say a man takes a church running 10, 15, 20 people, and then in 5 years they're running 100 and the offerings went up $100,000, but his pay is still the same. That doesn't make sense on paper.
Makes no sense.
Now, if you brought in a CEO to run your company and it experienced that kind of revenue growth, you would kick that money back around to take care of the one that helped get you where you're at.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of rural churches do not know how to take care of their pastor, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing this.
Yes.
And they don't have a huge revenue source to begin with. Some of those churches, I don't want to be hurting, but it will hurt some people. Some of those churches don't even need to be in existence, and for various reasons, they weren't started right, or whatever the case may be. But if you have a church that God wants to honor, it's a good church, then you need some of this information that we're going to give you. One of the things that I have seen is this: a lot of churches want to hire a full-time pastor. We want you to come and be our full-time pastor because we want to be a part of a church that has a full-time pastor, not a part-time pastor. And so you come on as a full-time pastor, and you take care of that pastor and his wife and few children in such a way that if he wanted to, he could go to the local health department and he could apply for food stamps at the social services department and get food stamps to help aid and assist him. But it would embarrass you to know that your pastor is receiving food stamps to take care of his family. So you don't want him doing that. Or you would be opposed to your pastor going out and getting a side job or a secular job to help him supplement the income the church is giving him so that he can have a nice car, take his wife out to eat. That vehicle he's going to be using in the ministry to aid and assist and be a benefit and a blessing to you. And so there's a lot of the mentality about taking care of a pastor, primarily among smaller churches and in more rural churches, that they don't understand what God's wanting to bless them with. And one of the things, too, that I have seen through the years, I've been at Galilee for 20 years. The church has done a very good job of taking care of me and my family down through the years, but we give back. Most real pastors are givers. They're going to give back into the ministry. And I want our church to be blessed. I want our people to be blessed. We are a financially blessed church. But one of the reasons why we are, I really believe this, is that they have an interest in taking care of my family and I believe God blesses them personally and their businesses in return. And if you'll learn to be good to your pastor, I promise you God's going to be good to your church. He just is going to simply be good to your church in various ways and from various places. God will be good to your church. Now, Matt, you talk to a lot of younger pastors. What are they saying about this particular topic we're talking about today?
Well, the majority of it really boils down to the finances. Like how much does the church pay? When do they pay? Because in the man's mind, he wants to make sure that his family is going to be well taken care of, and make sure there's gas in the tank, make sure there's food in the cupboard, groceries on the table. Make sure the lights are on, and of course, if you go to a job and you're going to get an interview, and that's going to be one of the questions that come up: how much does this job pay? And that's not a question that the preacher's asking I take to church, because that's just like Brother Mike said earlier about it's a calling, regardless if the man is getting the check or not getting the check. But I think it's beneficial for the church if they can take care of the man of God, because if not, they're going to lose out on some blessings that the Lord's trying to do to the church by taking care of the man of God. And of course, I've been on both sides. I was a deacon at Lighthouse at my home church here in Pageland, and trying to do the work there, make sure the preacher was taken care of, get the people aware of what's going on in the pastor's life. And I think that's the problem in our churches. You have so many carnal people in the church. They don't want the preacher to get involved in their life. They don't want the preacher, getting involved with them, letting them know what they're doing. And so they don't know anything about the pastor. They don't know the pastor's financial situation. They don't know the pastor's bills. They don't know what it takes as far as gas or wear and tear on the vehicle driving up the road or tires. And our church bought our last set of tires on our Jeep. And some of the guys in the church walked by our Jeep, looked at our tires, seen the tires need to be. That's just things that people don't think of. They drag race. They race in. They race in. They drag in. They race out.
Yeah.
So they're coming in. They're coming out. They don't consider those things, and that's when a church takes care of the pastor, the Lord's going to make sure that the church is going to thrive. And I ain't saying you got to give the preacher $100,000 salary every year, but if the church can take care of the preacher, that'd be very beneficial.
How many miles do you drive in the ministry a week?
All right, so if I leave my house on Wednesday night to go to church, it's 60 miles there, 60 miles back. So it's 120 miles one way. We bought our Jeep in 2018, and it was brand new. There wasn't a mile on it. And it's 2022 now, and we're over 90,000 miles on a 2018 vehicle.
And you don't drive that vehicle all the time.
No, sir. Right. I have a couple other vehicles that we drive. I brought a Honda Accent in 2012, brand new, no miles on it, and it's got over 250,000 miles on it. So we drive 60 miles one way to church. We've been doing it for 60 years.
And that doesn't even. So you're driving when you go to church. You're driving 120 miles. So 240 miles or whatever it is that you're driving just for church services per week. And that doesn't count ministry miles that you're driving.
Don't count ministry
and
miles.
how many ministry miles would you guess you drive?
I quit keeping up because I have so many different vehicles, and I don't know. I don't go to Concord as much as I used to. Used to is about 3 or 4 times a week. We was in Concord. We had a camper we would stay in. We're not as traveling as much as we used to, far as ministry miles to Concord. But we, I don't know how many.
Over 300 a week.
Yeah, it's over 300 a week. Yeah,
over 300
easily.
So, what do you think, brother Mike, as far as some of the things that had come to your mind in dealing with this subject? You brought some very good points to bear this morning, but what's some other things that are on your heart?
I just think it's about a church having the right culture. You got to get your mind right. You got to remember this: the money that comes in to the plates that people are giving in tithes and offerings, the supreme reason for that money, how God intended for it to be spent, was twofold: to take care of those who serve the body, and then also to get the gospel out. I mean, if I knew Jesus was coming on the last Sunday of 2022,
right,
a Lighthouse Baptist Church would be broke because we would have exhausted every dime and every resource. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying we act like idiots and spend every dime every week. I'm just saying this, that make sure the monies are being appropriated. And don't be afraid as time moves on for your pastor to get to the place where he's making decent money. There's nothing anti-scriptural or wrong with that. And don't forget this, by the way, we are in the middle of a grand season of inflation.
Right.
Everything is going out the roof right now, and some churches will let that go right by and not think about how that's impacting the pastor. And then at the end of the week, there'll be forklift drivers, and I'm not downing anything like that will be making more than your pastor's making. And the sad part is there's money in the bank. And oh, by the way, it's not just that the man of God is asked to live by faith. The people are also charged with following his faith.
Right.
So don't always expect for him to be the one living on the lower bread. Why don't the church take a faith step and be willing to make his salary make sense where he can live, and let God do a miracle and improve their faith? This is the last thing I would say. When it comes to that rural church sitting down in a room full of men trying to do the right thing by their pastor, just know this, that whenever the company out there whose job board you're looking at advertises the job, and it's, say, they're advertising $25 an hour, and then the fine print is plus medical, dental, and 401k. In other words, they don't take every little perk given to you as an employee and wrap it up in your salary.
Right.
Or that $25 an hour job would be $38 an hour. So understand the difference between benefits versus base salary package.
It's two totally different things.
It is two totally different things.
I don't think your pastor needs to live way above the average person in your congregation, nor do I feel that he needs to live below the average person in your congregation. He is among you. He wants to be among you. If he's a true, genuine man of the Lord who has a desire to serve you, he wants to serve with you, not over you, nor does he desire to serve under you. He wants to serve with you, and he wants to work with you. And allow the Lord to touch your heart and your church to be a blessing and to be a help to your pastor. And if you will do that, I can promise you on experience, based on experience as a man who was a layperson, who was a worker, who saw to it that his pastor was taken care of, and now as a pastor that's being taken care of by a church, I can say from both perspectives, God will bless you if you take this material that we're talking about serious in your local house of worship. Hey, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you dropping by. And you, friend, have a great day and keep pressing on the upward way.